That sets the stage for potentially a big explosion in the country if that sequence of events occurs. Some use the term civil war. I don't see how civil war is something you can get to when you're talking about a population that doesn't serve in the military and is generally unarmed. But we could definitely see massive riots and even open street violence on a large scale if these quote-unquote secular forces within the opposition take a heavy-handed approach to compelling the ultra-Orthodox into national service in the months and
When
years
Israelis
ahead.
are asked what should be done about this very serious threat, the dominant answer is manage the risk. That sounds reasonable. And maybe it is tactical, but it also reveals something deeper. Turkey is a problem. Yes, Erdogan is hostile. Yes, Turkish moves in the region are problematic. But please, not another front. Not while Gaza, Iran, Lebanon, the economy, internal politics are already stretching Israel thin. That is the voice of an exhausted nation.
Hey, I'm Ryan Jones in Jerusalem for Israel Today. Today I'm joined by fellow Israel Today editor David Shishkoff up in the Galilee, and we are going to be discussing the issue of the Haredi draft, otherwise known as the military conscription of Israel's ultra-Orthodox Jewish men. And this is probably the most contentious issue in the country today, especially as we head into an election season, perhaps even more contentious than the mistakes that were made leading up to October 7th. So the crux of the issue is this. Israel has a large portion of its population, Jewish population, that are ultra-Orthodox. They make up about 18 to 20% of the population, but they are largely exempt from performing the mandatory military service that other Jewish citizens must perform. Now, for decades already, the quote-unquote secular portions of Israel's population have already been frustrated by this because they feel the ultra-Orthodox are not helping to carry the burden of the defense of the state. And that has become exacerbated over the past 3 years because defense of the nation has become crucial, of course, with all of these existential threats. And we've seen over the course of the Gaza war and expanding into Lebanon and Syria and Iran, that the same portions of the population are again and again being called upon to fight because there's a shortage of combat manpower. And I know I have, and I'm sure David has, many friends and family members who have done 4, 5, 6, even more tours of duty during this war. The same people called up again and again for weeks and sometimes months at a time.
Yeah, I have some sons involved in, like you're saying, in combat. And so I know up close and personal that we need combat soldiers, although no one would really want it to be their own sons or brothers. And so the need is huge. The cost is huge. And there's a segment of society that the average Israeli would see is not pulling their share, meaning the ultra-Orthodox, as it's called in Hebrew, Haredi.
Yeah, and that need for combat soldiers is, I got up close and personal with that problem about a month ago when our middle son did what is known in Hebrew as a tzav rishon, and went for his initial military checkups as he goes into 12th grade. And the year after that, he'll need to go into the army. When they were doing their initial checkups, any of him or his friends who were over a certain combat readiness threshold they were given no choices. You know, in the past, you kind of had some choices. You know, you could request to be in different parts of the army, and of course, there are a lot of jobs besides combat soldier in any army. But these days, the IDF is so desperate for combat soldiers that any of the young men who were above a certain threshold in terms of their physical fitness, they were given no choice. They have to go into combat. And so I think that's already a little bit different than how it was in the past.
Yeah, I would agree with that. When I went into the army, 20, what was it, 30, just over 30 years ago for a short stint as a new immigrant, I I almost had a preference to become a combat soldier, and they ended up throwing me into some other kind of support roles. So I definitely agree with what you're saying.
Yeah, in my son's case, he also prefers combat, so he's not upset about it. But it was, I think, maybe a little bit jarring for some of his friends who actually preferred other things, such as, to go into computers or the different support roles, and it just wasn't open to them because their physical profile was high enough that they need them on the battlefield. So that kind of highlights, the crux of the problem here.
So let's maybe kind of pull out a little bit of the difference between secular and religious or Orthodox. And, I think sometimes from outside of the country, it seems like, there's just all the Jews and the Arabs and that's all there it is to that. But it's really kind of a culture war. It's a very big schism, once you get past the initial excitement of, wow, the promises have come true, the people have returned, and then see that there's disagreements over, what does it mean to return? Why did we return? Did we return just to be independent, or did we return because of the God of Israel? Or as the ultra-Orthodox stream, some of them would say, the return is not even all that valid because it was not enacted by God himself or by the future Messiah as they, would perceive him to be coming in the future. So there's, once you get into the nitty gritty of it, there's some serious tension within the Israeli society. So you have like the very hardcore secular people that might be kind of LGBTQ positive type things, and then you have kind of what's called masorti or traditional, who are quite a bit more positive about kind of faith or the religious tradition. And then kind of what's called national Orthodox or dati le'umi, who have the colorful knitted kippas typically. And then you get to the kind of black coated ultra-Orthodox. And so today we're talking primarily about the ultra-Orthodox, and not even all of them, but let's say the 3/4 of them or so who are very against serving in the army, which they perceive as largely secular. I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I would just highlight, even with those ultra Orthodox, the issue is not that they're sitting around and they just don't feel like serving in the army. As you were pointing out, all of these different streams of within the Jewish community, within the Jewish population, see the restoration of Israel or where Israel is at today in very different ways. Like you said, the national religious and the quote unquote secular, see the restored Jewish state, see the restored Israel as something they need to fight for. And the national religious would see it as something that God has commanded them to fight for. Whereas the ultra-Orthodox feel that some of them will even go so far as to view the state of Israel as an illegitimate restoration while they're waiting on the divine restoration. And so it's not just that they don't feel like going to the army or that they're lazy. They have religious reasons for rejecting this type of service to the state. And so just to pull out a little bit of numbers too, the ultra-Orthodox, that the black hats wearing ones that we're talking about who are at the center of this controversy, the number of ultra-Orthodox men who are of military age today, let's say between 18 and 24 years of age, number about 80,000 in Israel. Now, about 5,000 of them are serving in the IDF, so it's not right to say that they all reject. There are about 5,000 ultra-Orthodox Jews who are serving in the IDF today. The IDF has even formed a separate brigade for them so that they can keep all of their customs and traditions while in uniform. And there might even be more units than that have been established now that there are so many of them serving. On the flip side of that coin, the IDF is short around 20, maybe between 20 and 30,000 combat soldiers. So for the seculars who are upset about the ultra-Orthodox not serving, these numbers jump out. We're short 20 to 30,000 combat soldiers, and there are about 60 to 70,000 of you guys sitting over there doing quote unquote nothing.
Which is for them not nothing, because they believe that their studying of the Bible, the Hebrew scriptures, are more accurately the rabbinical commentaries on those, called the Talmud and that kind of thing, is more important even than military service. And they feel that somehow they're helping the world stay together by doing that.
Right, and you see in their protests against different legislation that has been brought up to kind of compel them to serve, in their protests, they will often argue that this is an assault on the Torah itself, because if they are not studying Torah, then Torah is not being studied in the land of Israel, which is detrimental to Israel in their eyes, more so than not having a strong enough military to fight off threats like Hamas.
It reminds me, years ago, I remember before this whole cataclysmic war with Iran years ago, do you remember that there was a certain a minority within the ultra-Orthodox that even kind of were palling up with Iranians? Do you remember that years ago? Like I remember seeing some pictures with ultra-Orthodox, maybe the
and they had traveled to Tehran,
the Satmar group, to kind of
right,
team up with some of Israel's enemies against it, which is hard to believe. But like you say, in their consciousness, they must feel that, human endeavors, especially secular / immoral people that established the state of Israel, it's for them, it's the opposite of a divine restoration.
Right. So, and that brings us to another kind of tricky situation for Israel, because as we're pointing out here, the ultra-Orthodox that refuse to serve are refusing based on very strong beliefs that are part of their creed, their religion, the way that they see the world, and especially the state of Israel. So this creates a little bit of a tricky situation, because there is another portion of the Israeli population that numbers about 20% of the overall population that is also exempt from military service, and that's the Arabs. And they are exempt for obvious reasons. While Israel touts itself as a democratic state where all citizens are equal in every way, it also defines itself as the Jewish state. So Jews are required to fight for it, and Arabs are not. Now, some ultra-Orthodox will argue that why should that portion of the population be exempt based on their ethnicity or their religion or their creed, while the ultra-Orthodox are being pushed into military service, even though their religion and their creed goes against serving the state in that way.
My, like I was talking with you a while back, I always, when this subject comes up, wish that someone would push through the legislation to require both of those streams to do some kind of national service. Like you don't have to pick up a gun. There's plenty of Jews who don't want to pick up a gun either. But to do what's called national service, shirut le'umi, which is an option I think that many national religious ladies do. And there's a wide variety of things that can be done with that, whether it's serving in a school or a hospital. And so that would kind of be my utopian solution to this problem is, for the Muslims, for the Arab Christians, for the ultra-Orthodox to find their own institutions that would kind of help their own communities, and that would be a legitimate way that they're giving, 2 years away for the good of the common cause, even if it's not with a gun in their hand. But like you say, that doesn't help the immediate pressure of people doing reserve duty for hundreds of days a year, leaving their families, their kids, their wife, their job, their business. We're talking mostly about men, although there's a stream of women soldiers who also serve in reserve duty.
So just to bring this back into focus of current events, Israel goes to national election at the end of October. This is probably at present the biggest issue on the ballot. The opposition parties, who, according to current polling, will unseat Netanyahu and his current coalition, they have vowed that if they do come to power and are able to form a coalition, one of their first moves will be to push through legislation compelling, forcing, and the ultra-Orthodox to serve, to do military or at least national service, and those who refuse will be punished under the law. So that sets the stage for potentially a big explosion in the country if that comes about, if that sequence of events occurs. Some use the term civil war. I don't see how civil war is something you can get to when you're talking about a population that doesn't serve in the military and is generally unarmed. But we could definitely see massive riots and even open street violence on a large scale if these quote unquote secular forces within the opposition take a heavy-handed approach to compelling the ultra-Orthodox into national service in the months and years ahead.
Stay tuned, eh?
Yeah, definitely. So that's it for this topic. Happy to have you with us. Join us next time.